So we are here to discuss the current state of play for BEPS 2.0, Pillar 2, in the context of financial services, and what tax leaders should be doing right now to prepare. And I'm delighted to be joined by Mark, Damon, and Catherine from our financial services team. Thank you all for joining us today. Mark, my first question to you, what are you seeing in the sector?
So thanks, Soula. So I work with banks and asset managers primarily, and I'll focus on asset management industry for the time being, let Kat talk about banking. But no, we're seeing a bit of a mixed picture. Obviously the asset management industry is a very big industry. There's lots of different players in it, whether you've got hedge funds, traditionals, private equity funds, real estate funds, etc., custodians. So I don't want, it's a very general statement, but I think what we're seeing is a lot of difficult technical issues in the funds area and unresolved issues at the moment. But we are now seeing some asset managers start projects. I think before they've been very much doing their calculations off the back of an envelope, not really focusing on the detail, taking a very high level analysis of their pain points. But now we're seeing those clients really think a bit more about some of the work they need to do, getting project teams together and also involving advisors. So it's a bit of a mixed picture. But kind of things are starting to evolve now, certainly in the last 6 months.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So movement, but still more to do.
Lots more to do.
Lots more to do. Catherine?
I completely agree to everything Mark said. Clients are generally further ahead than they were 6 months or so ago. And it's also a bit of a mixed picture in the banking sector too. I mean, at one end of the spectrum, you've got UK and European headquartered banks and banking groups that I would say are typically further advanced in their projects, whereas at the other end of the scale, you might have non-UK and EU inbound banking groups, particularly branch banks in the UK that have done quite a bit less. Perhaps they're waiting a little bit for instruction from head office. But those groups that have done the most have put in place some quite detailed plans. They've started to execute on those plans. They've got stakeholder groups all mapped out, and they've done some impact assessments. So lots and lots of good work ongoing, but there's still plenty to be done.
Damon, what about from insurance?
It's a mixed picture in insurance. Some really great examples of clients seizing the issue, having a good idea what their solution design is, knowing the precise issues they've got to get on top of, particularly as Pillar 2 law is still evolving, to others who are still a bit, everyone knows a little bit, but there isn't a dedicated team to Pillar 2, there isn't a dedicated person who's leading the project. And loads of people have got a lot of work to do, and it's particularly, I would say, the overseas headquartered groups who have more challenges in this space.
Yeah. Coming to my second question, what do you see are the biggest challenges, or perhaps the biggest opportunities that tax leaders should be thinking and managing? Maybe I'll go to Catherine.
Well, ever the optimist, I'll start with the opportunities. I think, Pillar 2 is such a fundamental change to the way that the international tax landscape looks to us as tax advisors and, of course, to our clients. It's a great chance for tax leaders to start elevating the profile of their function within the global organisation and really start using Pillar 2 as a way of evoking some change. So I've seen some great examples of clients getting involved in some finance change programmes and the tax aspects of those feeding into them and having some great success. So I think that would be a good opportunity.
I think on the challenges side, I think it's a big problem, Pillar 2, and it's complicated. And I think the challenge I see for tax leaders and for institutions generally, and even for advisors, is to kind of get the mix of skills right. There's an element of tax technical because it's very complicated rules and they're new and nobody knows anything about them really. Secondly, the transformation side of things. That needs a particular type of person, skill set and experience. And then ultimately the compliance, which seems a few years away, but it will be looming on us very, very quickly. So I think tax leaders need to understand the mix of the skills they need in their teams, whether it's fully in-house, fully outsourced, or a mixture thereof. So I would say that's the biggest challenge at the moment, Soula.
One of the biggest challenges is just a lack of time to do it. And a lot of groups have got to be ready for Q1 2024, even though the return might not be filed until mid-2026, because they've got to get the right figure in their Q1 accounts. It's not just the Pillar 2 issues in their own. Pillar 2 will drive corporate tax reform in a number of jurisdictions that insurers and banks are heavily operating, and the tax teams have then got to deal with those changes as well, and additional compliance burdens that are going to stick with them forevermore. In terms of opportunities, it's a great chance to revisit your operating model, how you do CBCR, indeed it's necessary to do that, so you've got qualified CBCR for Safe Harbour. Are there things you should be doing in terms of how you do consolidated tax reporting, improving, automating those processes?
So although the rules may feel that they're too far away, there's not really enough time to prepare. So what would be your advice for tax leaders? How should they prepare by the end of the year?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said earlier, I think getting the right teams in place is a key thing. Secondly, probably education. So education for the stakeholders, for the global CFO, for the ops teams, for the finance teams, for the legal teams, for the rest of the tax teams. So I think that's really important as a second thing. And lastly, I think just need to get on with it. It's a really complicated problem. The projects that I've seen so far are multifaceted, iterative, and really you don't want to be waiting and be the last person to start these projects, because there's just a very tight timeline.
I completely agree with Mark, and just thinking about some of the accounting disclosure requirements that we're coming up against at the end of the year, groups will have to make a comment in there as to their initial views on what the impact of Pillar 2 is for them. So if they aren't putting something forward, I'm sure their auditors will be asking them to do that, so there's plenty to be done between now and the end of the year.
I think people are essential. You've got to make sure you've got the right team in your organisation. That's not just tax, but it's finance, it's IT people to pull together your Pillar 2 solution, and the right advisors. And if you're doing transformation work, there's a shortage of people who can do tax transformation. So getting that team together soon is essential. It's important to also think what you're not going to do because of Pillar 2. Pillar 2 is so big, it's going to be, in many insurers and banks' cases, their biggest priority. So what projects are you going to have to put aside or defer in order to get Pillar 2 done, because Pillar 2 will dominate. There's clearly opportunities around improving existing processes, but I would also warn people to focus a lot on transition, because we're not far from the opening balance sheet date. There's a lot of hygiene work, for example, that can be done around that as you determine your Pillar 2 opening balance sheet, which isn't your normal opening balance sheet. And you wouldn't go into something like Basel 3 or Solvency 2 not knowing what your opening balance sheet is, so why would you go into Pillar 2 in that position?
I think we all agree that it's big, it's complex, and tax leaders should be acting now. Thank you for the insightful discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Soula.
Thank you.